approached the elevator on my left. I was hired to do a job for a particular part of the internet I'm not allowed to speak about. In my line of work, I was paid top dollar to take out some of the most horrible, treacherous, and filth this world had to offer. For example, the man I was hired to kill for this job was not only cheating on his wife, but he was doing so with underage girls. I had been given the information that he had a 13-year-old locked in his hotel room while he was out of town at a church seminar. As I entered the elevator, I tapped the 6th button. Room 613 is where I was not only going to kill a pervert, but rescue an innocent child in the process. I cannot disclose who hired me, but it was a relative that badly wanted this nightmare to end for their family. They were so desperate they were willing to pay me 6 figures. The elevator chimed and the doors opened on the 6th floor. I screwed the silencer onto the tip of my gun. When they weren't looking, I was able to get a master key from the front desk at the hotel. Halfway down the hallway, there was 613 on the right. Even through the thick walls of the pristine hotel, I could still hear cries and laughter in unison. I took a deep breath and scanned the key card to the room. It opened immediately. As I walked in, I saw indescribable things occurring. Let's just say I was definitely doing the world a favor by getting rid of this asshole. He turned his head around and stumbled as he was trying to put his pants back on. The little girl was lying on the bed, beat red with bruises all over her body. When he finally got his pants on, the pastor started trying to make a deal with me. "Look, sir, I don't know why you're here, and I don't know what they're paying you. I could offer you double, even triple if you just walk away." I couldn't help but glance at the little girl as my blood began to get hotter and hotter. With zero hesitation, I took my silencer and shot him square in the forehead. The little girl's cries became louder. She got off the bed and started kicking the corpse of her assailant. I didn't intervene and I let her finish. After a few minutes, I told her through a mask that my name was Jeremiah. I removed my disguise and revealed my face. I saw a little bit of relief wash over her beat red face as she lunged towards me and hugged me while she cried inconsolably. I returned her to her family and had my fee wired directly into an account. After a job such as this, I have to recalibrate normalcy. That normalcy lay within my wife, Laura. She had no idea what I did for a living, and as far as she knew, I was a computer programmer for a Fortune 500 company. After getting home in the middle of the night, I changed out of my work clothes, so to speak, and hopped into bed. She had been asleep for hours, but I couldn't help but cuddle up next to her and kiss her on the forehead as I myself drifted off to sleep. Even though it was only a handful of hours, I still woke up and made breakfast for her. After another successful job, I wanted to celebrate by making her favorite, which was Belgian waffles, a Colorado omelette, and a side of bacon. As she stumbled in with her blonde hair in a rat's nest, a silk pink robe, and a yawn shaking off the exhaustion, she opened her eyes and saw the spread. "Wow, I guess I've been a good girl." She would say that flirtatiously every time I made her favorites. She sat at the table and began tapping her foot to a song only she could hear in her head. It was a quirk I loved to no end. I did my routine as I acted like I was going to work. However, I don't have an office, or even a desk for that matter. I usually would spend my time in a Starbucks, or a parking lot of an abandoned movie theater and check my email for jobs. Today I was sitting at a table at a Starbucks, drinking an Americano and having a piece of lemon pound cake. I was going through my bank account and looking at the numbers. If Laura found out how much money we actually had, her head would be spinning until Christmas. I have accumulated quite a bit of money. I garner the reputation of being Cyanide, the hitman who never says no. I will do any job for the right price. Even though it hasn't happened yet, I even said that I could contract to kill a politician or even a child. I heard a chime through my headphones as I received a new email. The email header simply said, $1 million contract to take out an employee. I usually get a message that is so boring and filled with too many details. I never read them and just copy and paste the response I give every time. It's basically me accepting the job and asking them to either forward me a PDF file with the details or mail me a contract. This came in the form of a PDF file and I was not expecting what was enclosed on my computer screen. Good morning, Cyanide. My name is Curtis Rutledge. I am the CEO of Mayflower Energy. I recently discovered an employee that was snooping around in places that she shouldn't have been. This employee has discovered missing funds that I myself had taken personally. I will use a big chunk of the money to pay you to take her out. $1 million, to be exact. Use any means necessary, and I will need proof of her death. Below, I have placed a picture of her, her name, address, husband's name, and the department she works in for me. Please have this done within 48 hours before the next bank statements come out. As I scrolled down to see the image, my heart sank. There was a picture of my wife the day of our wedding. It was my favorite picture of her when we took sunset photos that day. Below it said Laura Bachman, for 21, Elm Street husband, Jeremiah Bachman. Occupation, Financial Department. In bold red print it once again said, please have this taken care of in 48 hours or less. I slammed my MacBook so hard I'm surprised I didn't break it. I had a few patrons look at me as I caused a scene right in the middle of a Starbucks. I opened the screen back up and couldn't help but start crying. Again, I had a rule that I would accept any job. I just didn't know that rule was going to include my wife someday. This Curtis Rutledge must have been real pleased with himself when he sent me this file. I could tell this was going to be the hardest decision of my life, and I didn't weigh the options nonchalantly. I knew what I had to do. I was going to kill the love of my life because my pride and my job were getting in the way of happiness. A detail I didn't mention earlier, as I was combing through the original email, it was alluded to that she hadn't told anybody yet. That includes upper management, coworkers, or even family members. Which was true, because she had never mentioned this to me. Though I wish she would have. I understand how it feels to keep a secret from your spouse. So I could not sanction that hypocrisy. I could have had her killed that day, but I decided to hold off until tomorrow to go through with the plan. Tonight I would act like nothing was wrong on the outside, but on the inside, I would treat it like it was the last time I would ever see her. If heartache could have killed a man, I would have been dead on arrival. I got home a little bit before Laura did and prepped dinner. Though it wasn't her favorite, she had told me it was top 5. I made her chicken cutlets and spaghetti. I could hear the click-clacking of heels leading up to the front door. She had always looked beautiful, but today she was the most beautiful thing I'd ever laid eyes on. She had curled her hair that morning and was sporting a black blazer with a black leather top underneath. As she took the blazer off, her pinstripe pants swinging with every step she took, she giggled and jumped up and down with glee when she saw what was on the dinner table. I must be on a roll. That or you racked up the credit card again without telling me, she said as she sat down and threw a wink in my general direction. I just smirked and chuckled as I looked at her. Once again she sat down and started tapping her foot, this time with her high heels clicking on the marble floor to a beat as I sat across from her. She was wolfing the food down like she hadn't eaten in days. I, on the other hand, only ate a few bites because I couldn't stomach the inevitable. That night, I didn't sleep a wink. I was up all night praying that this was just a nightmare that I was going to wake up from at any moment. When the sun rose in my window, I knew this wasn't a nightmare. It was my reality. I once again went through the whole routine of cooking breakfast and giving my wife a goodbye kiss before we left at the same time. Today I parked outside our abandoned movie theater. You could tell it was abandoned because the marquee still read, now showing, The Dark Knight Rises. Not even Batman could save this doomed theater, just like I couldn't save my future. I knew how I was going to do it. Not with a gun, strangulation, or explosives. I was going to kill Laura with the most decency I could find. Ironically, I was going to have to use my code name. In the garage, I had a lockbox that I told Laura was for the gun my father had given me before he passed away. There was a gun in there, I didn't lie about that, but underneath was a hidden compartment that held cyanide tablets. I carefully took a pouch out and put it in my pocket. That evening I was going to make Laura's favorite, tomato basil soup. It had been her favorite since her Italian grandmother made it for her when she was little. Nana was gracious enough to give the recipe to me as a gift the first Christmas of our marriage. I made this soup like I always did on special occasions. It got to the point where I didn't even need the recipe anymore. It was all muscle memory at that point. Just like killing perverts. Except my wife wasn't a pervert. She just knew too much. She came in with the same enthusiasm and sound effects. As she opened the door, she looked like an angel, wearing a white top with a pencil skirt to match and heels that also matched. I had dinner ready on the table for her before she walked in. I even had enough time to sneak the tablets and to dissolve into the soup beforehand. Once again, she was in awe that I had made her favorite meal. Even Nana knew what she was doing when I married you. She sat down with such quick pace and began shoveling the soup into her mouth. I took a couple of sips from my spoon as I watched her smile turn into panic. She started foaming at the mouth, the foam splattering on her outfit. After gasping and coughing for a few moments, she eventually went limp and smashed her head directly into the bowl of soup. Tomato red liquid began spilling off the edge of the table and getting all over her white outfit. Though I didn't use a gun, it looked like I had shot the love of my life in cold blood. I realized that I had heard her foot tapping for the last time. I sat there at the dinner table and cried for over an hour. I walked over to my deceased best friend and snapped a picture with my phone. I sent the photo to the associated email, and at the bottom I said, "The job is done. Could I meet you this evening for a handshake and the payment?" I sent the email and began to cry again until I was interrupted by a chime on my phone. It was a response email from Rutledge. The simple words made my blood boil. All it said was, "Splendid. Meet me at my office in 30 minutes. That was it. This was just a calculated incident for him. What did that say about me at the same time? I left Laura's body at the dinner table and went to Rutledge's office. His office was, of course, the penthouse of the Mayflower Energy Building. I knocked on his door and he told me to come in. He was standing over by the liquor cabinet pouring 2 glasses of bourbon. He waltzed up to me with one of the glasses and handed it to me. He raised his and said, "To a successful endeavor and a brighter future." We clinked glasses in a toast. I downed mine like it was water, and so did he. He turned around to get another glass for himself. "The money has been wired into your bank account, Cyanide," he said as he turned around. When he did that, I pulled out my silencer and unloaded into the back of his head, spine, and anywhere else on his fat, blubbery body. As he fell, he broke every glass shelf of his liquor cabinet as a pool of blood began seeping from him. I pulled out my phone to check the amount in my account, and he was right. I was $1 million richer. I couldn't believe what I had just done. Killing an innocent woman that I loved and taking out the person who paid me to do it. This is when I came to the realization that I couldn't do my ritual. I had no wife to return home to. She was gone. And to me, I might as well have been too. I returned home, and there, slumped over the table, she was. I stood in the kitchen for a moment in the silence where her foot tapping used to be. Then I grabbed a fresh bowl from the cabinet and ladled hot soup into it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out another pouch of tablets. I ripped it open and dropped it into my bowl. I let it dissolve and began eating. Right before the cyanide got to work, I looked over at Laura and through tears muttered, "I love you." Please forgive me. I'll be with you soon. The last thought I had in my mind was finally figuring out the song she was always tapping her foot to. It was the song we danced at our wedding, Dreamweaver by Gary Wright. I began gasping for air and foaming at the mouth before I met the same fate as her.
I have grown to loathe my wife, not for anything that she's done, said, or anything like that. It has gotten to the point where I just look at her and I want to throw up in my mouth. I fell out of love with her, and it happened overnight, it felt like. She's the same woman that I married 20 years ago. I guess something chemically changed in my head. I had this awakening ironically, waking up next to her one morning. There she was asleep, and I couldn't believe that this was someone I had married. What was I thinking? Sure, she's not the complete smoke show that I married right out of college, but she wasn't ugly. She was just average. I think it would have been easier if she were ugly. I knew I wouldn't have the balls to tell her I wanted a divorce or tell her exactly how I felt, so I went out looking for an alternative. Her name is Candy. We had dated back in high school, but had a falling out when I moved away for college. When I moved back to take over my father's business, I found out that she never left. When I ran into her in the lobby of Chipotle, I kind of figured that it was fate bringing us back together. She knows that I'm married. She knows that I have 2 kids that are grown, but we don't care. My wife, Jill, doesn't know that I'm having an affair behind her back. The kids don't know either, but they're off across the country at different colleges. All I can control is how I feel. They say the heart wants what the heart wants, and I want candy. The forbidden fruit tastes a little bit sweeter, and being with my wife is like eating air. No taste, no fulfillment, and plain. She might as well just change her name to Jane. Plain Jane. Last Friday night, when I was with Candy at a motel that charged by the hour, she proposed a plan to me. The plan was for me to kill Jill, so that Candy and I could embrace our true potential with the relationship. I was hesitant at first, but once I got home that night and just looked at my wife, I knew it was what I was supposed to do. Candy came up with the idea, and I came up with how I was going to do it. Jill and I have date nights on Wednesdays. We usually go to a mediocre steakhouse and then go home and have subpar sex. So my plan was to act like I was taking Jill to dinner, but we wouldn't even make it to the restaurant. I won't spoil how I did it. And so this is where the real story begins. "Hey, honey," I said to Jill with a fake grin. "We should try that new seafood place that just opened across town." Jill lifted her head from her Kindle and thought it was a great idea. She ran upstairs to get into what she called her best dress. It was a generic blue dress with white polka dots all over it. She had a pair of wedge sandals to match, and she put her hair up in a blue ribbon. She thought she looked like a 10 out of 10, but to me, she looked more like a 2 compared to Candy. I held back the vomit in the back of my throat. "How do I look, Albert?" Jill asked me as she did a 360 spin. I was lying through my teeth, but I said, "Just as beautiful as the day that I met you." I rolled my eyes so hard behind her back, I'm surprised they didn't fall out of my skull. "Are you ready for dinner?" I asked her with a little bit of haste in my voice. "Absolutely. I hope they have crab cakes." Jill responded with delight in her pitch. The restaurant was about 10 minutes away, but where we were going was about 15 minutes away. That place was Cotton Creek. This was a lake that hosted plenty of holiday parties, weddings, and afternoon hangouts. Tonight, however, it would be the cause of death. As I drove past the restaurant, Jill became very confused. I assured her that I had a plan for this evening. I drove the car to the bank of the lake. When I put it in park, Jill went from confusion to having romance on her face. "I wanted to bring you here because about 20 years ago, we got married on the other side of the lake. I think we should renew our vows and have a party. The kids will be back for the 4th of July holiday, and we can have a cookout with all of our family and friends." Jill's eyes began to tear up. I let her believe that this was the most romantic thing we could have done. That wasn't the end of the surprise, though, as I pulled out a bottle of champagne from the back seat. Jill said that she needed to use the restroom, as she pointed at one of the porta potties next to the lake. She dried her eyes and ran straight towards it. This is what I was banking on as I took one of the glasses and put a handful of crushed sleeping pills in it. By the time Jill returned, it was all dissolved. I made a toast in the name of love as we both drank the champagne. After a few minutes of kissing, Jill eventually passed out from the pills. As she slumped in the passenger seat, I reached behind into the back seat and grabbed some rope I had bought at the hardware store that morning. I had cut enough length to tie her arms and her legs together. After I finished with her legs, I came up with an idea. I took the blue ribbon from her hair and tied her hands together. I then got out of the car, put her over my shoulder, and put her in the trunk. As soon as I put her in the trunk, she came to. She gasped, and her eyes widened as she noticed that she had been tied up. She started screaming, and that's when I noticed the roll of duct tape I had in the trunk. I wrapped it around her mouth 3 times. She stopped screaming, but I heard her mumble under the tape one simple word: "Why?" I laughed and looked at her as I yelled, "Why? Why? I'll tell you why. For the past 20 years I have been falling down an endless pit. It just took me over 19 years to notice. Loving you and having a life with you is the equivalent of shitting in my hand and clapping. I've found somebody else. Candy from high school. I've been seeing her for about 6 months now. We plan on starting a life together. We plan on making our house a home together, a house you will never come home to." As soon as I said that last sentence, I slammed the trunk shut. I could hear her muffled screams and pleas under the tape for me to stop. However, that didn't stop me from taking the biggest rock I could carry and putting it on the gas pedal. Even through the roaring of the motor, I could still hear Jill screaming in the trunk. The car flew into the lake and I watched it slowly sink. I waited a few moments after the bubbles quit coming up and called Candy. As soon as she picked up the phone, all I said was, "She's gone." I then waited a couple of days to call the police to file a missing persons report. I had taken her phone and typed up a fake goodbye letter and texted it to myself before I smashed her phone. I had made it look like she left me, and it was unexpected and sudden. During all of this, I had Candy on the sidelines and told her in about a month or 2 we could start seeing each other regularly again. A couple of months went by, which included both of my kids coming home for the summer to help look for Mom. But after a while, they both had to go back to school. I acted devastated, and it was the greatest performance of my life. After they went back, I had moved Candy in so that she could leave her fleabag apartment. I figured I had until winter break to break it to the kids. I would make up some story about how behind the scenes Candy was the one that was getting me through their mother leaving me. It was going to be a script that was Oscar-worthy. I love my kids, but sometimes between the years, I think there's just a blank space, something they inherited from their mother. As Candy moved in, we began messing around like we were teenagers, drinking a lot, smoking a lot of weed, and having animalistic sex on a regular basis. We were actually right in the middle of it one evening when I heard a knock at the door. I quickly got dressed and went downstairs. I looked through the peephole, and there stood Officer Carmichael. My heart sank and my blood turned cold when I saw him. As I opened the door, I said to him, "Hey Jerry, what's going on?" He took his hat off and told me that he had some bad news. Feeling like I had been caught, I just hung my head down and let out a deep breath. "We got a tip today that a car had emerged from Cotton Creek. We ran the plates and found out that it was your car, or Jill's car rather. We pulled it out of the lake." It felt like an eternity before he finished the sentence. We found nothing except for a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. That was the most shocking thing anybody could have told me. There wasn't a body? I thought to myself. I played it off and acted shocked that they found the car at the lake. Jerry told me that he believed she had ditched the car so that she would be untraceable. He once again apologized to me for the millionth time since her disappearance. All I could mutter was thank you as I produced crocodile tears. He patted me on the shoulder and told me to have a good night as he got in his patrol car and left. I was haunted by Jerry's words. As I slowly ascended the stairs, it's all I could think about. However, when I opened the bedroom door, there was Candy in a full leather outfit. After seeing that sight, my brain was wiped like I was in a Men in Black movie. We instantly picked up where we left off. As we were in the throes of passion, I heard another knock at the door. Frustrated, I let out a growl as I stomped down the stairs. I opened the door and said, "Listen, Jerry, I appreciate the sympathy, however." What I was looking at on my doorstep was not Jerry. It was Jill. She looked bloated, rubbery, and her skin was blue, so blue that it matched her dress. She had one sandal missing, algae in her hair, and taut between her hands was her blue ribbon. I looked up and gasped as she grinned at me and said, "I came home."
I've always felt out of place, even with my father by my side. He is a farmer, and being the farmer's daughter, we really do not have much. We usually have to rely on the village and its resources to get us through. When it comes to love, sure, I have been courted by a few gentlemen, but something always felt off. All these feelings came to pass when I saw her face for the first time. I was at the market, reaching for a loaf of bread. Little did I know another hand was reaching for the same loaf. When our hands touched, I felt something within me. Seeing her blonde hair and her blue eyes transported me into a state I had never been in before. Beauty was something this woman was most certainly blessed with. Just looking at her made me tingle on the inside. "My apologies. You may have it if you wish," she said to me as she drew her hand back with a giggle. I just laughed in response and placed the loaf in my basket. She tilted her head slightly and said, "Forgive me, I am newly arrived in the village. Pray tell, what is thy name?" No one had ever asked for my name before, so it took me a moment to understand the gravity of the question. "Mercy," was all I could say as I shyly put my head down and looked at the ground. "Well, it is a pleasure to meet thee, Mercy. My name is Constance." Constance. That is the name that will be etched in my heart for the rest of my days. I knew it was wrong, and that I was supposed to be attracted to men, but something had awakened in me. The Bible would call it lust, but I would call it certainty. I prayed I might see her again, even if it meant coming to the market and spending what little money we had just to see her. I returned home and through a cough father asked, "Hast thou found bread?" I smiled and lifted the loaf over my head. "I have it," I said victoriously. A new woman to the village let me have the last loaf. I concluded. "Terrific." He started with another cough. "Now the porridge will be bearable," he said with a chuckle. God bless her for that. That was his response to getting the last loaf. She sounds like a most worthy soul. I am glad to have someone like her in the community. All I could do was daydream about her. She is wonderful indeed, I muttered under my breath as I bit my lower lip. I had wandered to the market every day since I encountered her. I would usually sneak off when my father would take his naps. He has been sick for quite a while and needs his rest. I have practically been running the farm all by myself for the past few months. Unfortunately, Every time I would go back to the market, she was never there. My heart would flutter every time I entered the area, but I always left feeling empty. That was not until church on Sunday. I looked across the pews, and there she was sitting at the end of the front pew. As I got up to approach her, I was interrupted because the service had started. A man walked up to the pulpit I had never seen before. He was a little bit younger than the last reverend. He began to introduce himself. "Good morning. My name is Nathaniel. You may call me Reverend Nathaniel, or simply just Reverend. I will be the new leader of the village's walk with the Lord. I am fairly new to the area, and I did not come alone. I have brought my wife with me. Her name is Constance." I let out a small gasp, but put my hands over my mouth before it escaped fully. As she graciously rose from the pew and walked up to the pulpit to introduce herself, my heart sank all over again. I had no idea that she was the Reverend's wife. I do not remember much of the message that day, but at the end there was an introduction to meet the new Reverend and his wife. While some of the village elders stopped the Reverend to recite scripture or ask questions about the church, this left Constance fully available for conversation. I approached her carefully. We locked eyes before I even fully got to her. All she did was smile at me as she embraced me with a hug. "Mercy," she said as she pulled me in. "It is most wonderful to see thee again. Thanks be to God." I embraced every moment of the hug. She was warm, soft, and smelled like a garden. After the hug, I finally spoke to her. "Forgive me. I did not know thee to be the Reverend's wife. I would have shown greater courtesy during our first encounter," I said to her, not making eye contact due to my shyness. She just giggled and responded, "There is no need for apology. Thou wert most gracious. I look forward to seeing more of thee about the village," she said to me as she daintily swayed away to meet up with Nathaniel. The fluttering in my stomach had returned. After some time had passed, my father's illness became worse. So much so that he was bedridden. This word spread fast around the village. Even the doctor told me he did not have long. It was not much longer after that until there was a knock at the door. I opened it to see Reverend Nathaniel and Constance in my doorway. He had a genuine look of concern, and Constance lit up like a flame when she saw me. "Mercy, forgive this intrusion, but I believe it necessary to administer thy father his last rites. The doctor believes he shall not last the evening," he said with his head hung low and his hat down to his chest. I sniffled due to the devastation of the news. However, I did invite them in. Nathaniel insisted that he and my father be alone for a few moments. I obliged as I went into the kitchen to make beverages. When I came back, Constance was standing in the middle of the living quarters looking at an old family portrait above the fireplace. "I see you and your father. Where is thy mother?" she said as she pointed to the figure in the painting. "Mother passed away due to an illness last harvest. I believe my father has the same," I stated as I wiped tears from my eyes. She approached me and took my hands in hers. "My apologies. A girl really needs a woman's touch in her life." I could not tell if she was being flirtatious or giving me guidance. She then took my right hand and kissed it, followed by patting it gently. Not a moment too soon after, Nathaniel came out of the room. He took a deep breath and informed me that my father had passed away. He said he was with the Lord now and that the pain was over. I could not help but break down and cry into Constance's shoulder. She began to rub my back and say a little prayer in my ear. A couple of days later we buried my father. Nathaniel gave a great sermon as we laid him to his final resting place. Soon after everybody had left the cemetery, I was the only one that remained. That is when I felt a hand on my shoulder. As I turned to look, there was Constance again. She gave me her condolences as she gave me a kiss on the lips. It was a kiss that lingered for an eternity. I was feeling all kinds of emotions, sadness in my heart and fire in my loins. Constance broke contact and looked at me. "If ever thou hast need of me, thou knowest where I may be found." She left, leaving me with a certainty I could not deny. I knew with certainty that I adored her, and she clearly returned the same feeling. After a couple of days, I was gathering up some of my father's tools, belongings, and literature. I heard a knock at the door. Once again, there stood Constance, radiating light and comfort. She asked me what I was doing at the moment. I informed her that I was getting my father's affairs in order. Affair was an ironic word to use, because she invited me to the church. When we got there, she pulled out a key from her bosom and opened up the vestry. There were robes, ancient texts, and various church items. She guided me in before locking the door behind us. As she locked the door, she threw me up against one of the shelves and began kissing my lips, neck, and my bosom. She then dropped to her knees and began lifting up my dress. She began using her lips in a different way as I began to have a sensation I never thought possible. I let out an animalistic cry as I climaxed. I could not help but feel my tension dissipate, but it was replaced with some guilt. As Constance arose and wiped her mouth with a handkerchief, she told me not to worry. "This will be our little secret. None shall know of this." In the days that followed, my guilt and my passion for her grew in equal measure. We would rendezvous in secret areas, but she would sit in the pew like nothing was going on when it came to the Lord's service. A few days went by and she led me up the bell tower. It was the highest point of the village and the view was breathtaking, followed by her taking my breath away as we began to lie together below the railing out of sight. After a few moments together, we both found our release as the bell above us chimed. The loudness of the bell drowned out any sounds we were making. At the very end, I had never felt more at peace than I did with her on the floor of the tower. The days that followed became a cycle. We would make love whether it be at my cottage, the church, or somewhere deep in the wooded area. Then the Lord's service to close the week, and then we would start it all again. This went on for some time. Each time the chances of being caught would increase. Unfortunately, we finally did. It was at my cottage when we were deep in the throes of lovemaking. That is when Nathaniel burst in and caught us in the act. He did not say anything. He had a look of despair on his face. He wiped his eyes and left my cottage quietly. What happened next was not so quiet. The next time I arrived in the public village, I was detained by our local authorities. "Witch!" They screamed at me as they pointed their fingers. They wrapped rope around my wrists and took me to the church. There I was to stand trial for what they alleged was witchcraft. As I was escorted through the doors, there stood Nathaniel at the pulpit. To his left stood Constance. Her face was red and she was crying up a storm. I was taken before Nathaniel. Every pew was full with everybody in the village with hatred in his eyes. Nathaniel began to speak. "It seems we have a witch in our midst. Mercy here has taken it upon herself to be a temptress towards my wife, who was seduced by satanic powers. Mercy, dost thou have an explanation?" Each word he spoke got louder and louder, and with more force. I felt as if the church would collapse. I begged him to understand that I was not a witch, and nothing more than a woman who was in love with another woman, as blasphemous as it seemed. I went on to tell him that I was a God-fearing woman, and the way I felt about Constance was purely consensual. "Blasphemy!" he shouted towards me. "My wife is more of a God-fearing woman than you will ever be, young lady. Your seduction has clouded her judgment, nothing more. I once again began pleading with him to understand. Why don't we ask Constance what she thinks? I said with a firm stance. Nathaniel turned his head and looked at his wife. Constance, is what she's speaking the truth? Constance began tearing up even more, took a deep breath, and began to speak. Yes, I am in love with this woman. No satanic powers, no seduction, just pure unadulterated love. The congregation began to gasp and murmur. Nathaniel stood there with his face as red as an apple. Quiet, he said towards the congregation. My wife has been seduced by the devil. If what she speaks is truth, then my wife, as well as Mercy, shall be put to death in the name of the Lord. The crowd once again began to murmur and gasp. I walked eyes on Constance, who fell to her knees and began to plead with her husband. I couldn't let it in this way. I began to speak once again. Reverend, please do not put this innocent woman to death. I confess, she is under my spell. Once I am executed, the curse will be lifted. The crowd began to chant, "Kill the witch," over and over in unison. Nathaniel smiled as he looked at me. Witch, you shall be put to death before the night is out. He began to salivate as the next words came out of his mouth. Take her to Gallows Hill. The crowd began to cheer. As I was let out of the church, I didn't cry. I showed no emotion at all. I had sealed my own fate in the name of love. Once we got to a tree, there was already a noose waiting for me. Up against the tree was a ladder that they forced me to climb after they put the rope around my neck. With the rope around my wrists and my neck, I climbed up the ladder. The entire village was there overlooking my soon-to-be death. Nathaniel looked at me. Any last words, witch? All I could do was look at Constance. I cleared my throat and muttered the words, "Hail Satan!" As the crowd gasped, I didn't break eye contact with Constance, and while they were distracted, I mouthed the words "I love you" to her as a single tear ran down my cheek. Nathaniel, after losing his smile, angrily kicked the ladder from underneath me as I began to hang. I began to cough as my mother and my father did during their sickness. The last thing that I saw was Constance, looking at Nathaniel with tears in her eyes, continuing and saying to him, "The spell has been lifted. Praise the Lord." Her tears continued, but not tears of joy, tears for a lost love. I closed my eyes, and the last thing I remembered was the crowd cheering.